Let's start with our little excursion to Executor Island. This time we are not accompanied by Lily and encounter the Executor behaving weirdly, which introduces kind of a mini trial where we have to help them with some Pinsir who are attacking them. As a thank you, one of the Executor lets us climb its neck so we can reach the Sun or Moon flute, which we need to play at the altar of the Sun or Moon, located just behind Pony Canyon. This time, however, we don't fight Hapu, the new kahuna of Pony, before venturing through this massive dungeon, which I think is a really good change, considering we're kind of in a hurry to help Lusamine stop Necrozma. It's kind of weird that our character still thinks there's enough time to take on the dragon trial, but they grin maniacally most of the time, so who knows what's going through their heads. The dragon trial hasn't changed at all, which is fine, but I would have liked if this was where we would get the new Z Crystal Commonium Z, instead of it being placed in a random new grotto in post-game. But maybe that's a good thing, because that move is kind of overpowered, given that it raises all of Komodo's stats by 1 and hits every opponent on the battlefield. It would have been a great help in one of the fights we'll talk about later though. All in all, I still really like Pony Canyon as a dungeon, which only makes me sadder that this is the only first real dungeon of this game. It would have been great if areas like the volcano on Akala or maybe 10 Carat Hill would have been expanded to be real dungeons, because if there's one thing Alola needs is more places that you have to explore on your own and have to solve small puzzles in. I mean, why let us move boulders with Machamp if we're only going to do it like 8 times in the entire game? Feels kind of pointless. That's another thing that makes Pony Canyon such a cool place to play through, because you have to use Tauros, Machamp, Mudsdale and one of the surfers to explore everything here. Once we finally reach the altar of either the Sun or the Moon, the story climax for this game begins. Just like before, we summon either Solgaleo or Lunala, but this time instead of it helping us to get to Nihilaga's world, it opens a wormhole and Guzma and Lusamine fall out of it, warning us of the monster that is Necrozma. After that, Necrozma joins our little gathering and quickly gets in a battle with Nebby, and dominates it, taking on the new Duskmane or Dawn Wings form. When they were first shown, everybody made fun of how weird and stupid they looked, and I get that, but I also have to say that I really like Duskmane's design. Also, it's kind of interesting that they didn't turn out to be forms of either Solgaleo or Lunala, but of Necrozma, which story-wise makes sense since it basically takes control of their bodies as some kind of parasite. It also changes type to either Psychic Steel or Psychic Ghost, and it learns the exclusive move for Solgaleo and Lunala, which both absolutely make sense. Speaking of these moves, they've received special Zap moves, which also makes sense. The only thing I really have to say about these moves is that it's cool that both the regular and the fused forms can use them, but that's it. What's more interesting is the fact that these new forms are version exclusive, and I wonder which came first, the decision to split Ultra Sun and Ultra Moon in 2 versions, or the idea of Necrozma taking control of Solgaleo's and Lunala's bodies. If I had to guess, I would say the first one is true, but I'm okay with it since you still kind of get 2 of the cover legendaries in one game, so that everyone gets the chance to use them both. After Necrozma fuses with Nebby, it opens up a couple more Ultra Wormholes all over Alola, and we get a really cool scene with all the kahunas and Hau dealing with the UBs on their islands. Although I really love this scene, it would have been so amazing if we could take control of Hau or someone else and actually fight the UBs, or if we had to go back to every island and help out fighting them. But instead of doing that, we stay at the altar and have to fight Necrozma, which is a really cool battle with really interesting and intense music. Luckily this battle isn't too hard, but instead of just being defeated, Necrozma disappears into a wormhole and flees to another dimension, leaving us, Lily, Lusamine and Guzma behind. Now darkness reigns over Alola, and everywhere we go is nearly pitch black, which immediately reminded me of Ruby and Sapphire, where at the end of the game it would either rain really hard or the sun was shining hot. Sadly, most people won't know this, but if you actually fly back to any place on the islands, it's actually dark. Most will probably just continue with the story and miss this cool little detail, although it doesn't really change too much and of course none of the random NPCs react to it. Anyway, the Ultra Recon Squad finally arrives too and tells us that apparently Necrozma is after the light in our Z power ring. It's obvious now that their mission failed and that we are the last hope of the people in Alola, so they let us ride on their Lunala or Solgaleo to reach the parallel dimension that Necrozma fled to. This introduces a minigame that I will talk about later. First, let's continue with the story and get to the Ultra Megalopolis. When they first announced the Ultra Megalopolis, they released a really cool artwork that just makes me yearn for how great this Nintendo Switch games will look like, but it also made me excited about this place. But since I'm a really intelligent individual and know everything, I knew not to expect too much, or anything of it really. So I didn't, and for some reason I'm still disappointed that the Ultra Megalopolis is literally just a hallway. Seriously though, I'm not too bitter about this, but a lot of people were just annoyed by how cheap this feels, and I get that, but what would they have wanted? A big city with some routes around it where you could catch Ultra Beasts in the wild? Oh, that actually sounds really good, but would also have probably replaced the unique worlds of the UBs or taken away some other stuff, so I'm okay with what we got. One single explorable room, maybe the headquarters of the Ultra Recon Squad, would have been nice though. What definitely is nice is what's laying at the end of this hallway, Ultra Necrozma, or as I call it, the first real JRPG final boss in Pokémon history. What can I say about it? That I think the music is absolutely amazing, that I love the design of Ultra Necrozma, that this is actually a really hard fight and well designed. I pretty much love all about this fight, but your mileage may definitely vary, since battles in all Pokémon games can play out very differently depending on what kind of team you have. My team couldn't do anything other than be one-shotted by everything Necrozma did, so I had to grind and use every advantage I could to win, which was really fun. Other people may have a stronger team or just simply more luck and won't have any problems with it at all, which is sad of course, but what else can Game Freak do? I mean, this is already one of the strongest Pokémon ever, and all of its stats are doubled and it's suddenly 10 levels higher than the fight just a couple of minutes ago. As difficulty goes, this is as far as it gets, at least what only a single enemy is concerned. I also really like that you can't catch Necrozma here. Can you imagine how boring it would be if you could just throw Master Ball and catch it without problems? Also, it might just be me, but since Necrozma got 3 new forms in these games, it feels like none of them get enough focus to really make them stand out. Anyway, after we defeat Ultra Necrozma and have basically saved the world, Lusamine is no longer evil, the Ultra Recon Squad have accomplished what they wanted, and everyone is happy. I have to say that as much as I like the battles and the music and everything, I still think that Sun and Moon had the stronger climax and story overall. I already talked about this back in the Lusamine segment, but I still prefer seeing her fused with Nihilego after getting yelled at by Lily to all of this, but you might think differently. To me, this is the only real dent into this definitive version idea of the third versions, so if you would ask me if you should only play the originals or the Ultra versions, I would have a difficult time answering that. Sure, so far the Ultra versions have been basically better in every regard, but I enjoyed the story and climax of the original Sun and Moon so much that it makes me really sad that they changed it here. What I wasn't sad about is receiving Poipole from the Ultra Recon Squad. Thankfully you can decline the first time and get it shortly after, giving you the option to save and reset for a good nature. Another really cool thing is that from this point on you can basically catch all the UBs, since you can still ride on the Ultra Recon Squad's Lunala or Solgaleo and visit their worlds, although I don't think you can catch the legendaries until post-game. Nonetheless, this provides you with the ability to use UBs in your team before the Pokémon League, which is really cool. Speaking of the Pokémon League, in Sun and Moon you basically only had the League left after the climax, but thankfully Ultra Sun and Ultra Moon had quite some stuff for you to do before that. First off, Mina's trial. In Sun and Moon it was again obvious how little time and resources they had for the trials, so Mina, the fairy-type captain on Pony Island, just didn't get her own and you just met her in Pony Canyon where she would give you the Z Crystal. Luckily this is fixed in a fantastic way, because she now has a trial where you have to collect 7 petals from all the other captains in the Alola region. I think this is a wonderful idea for the last trial, and it also works as a great buffer between the climax and the Pokémon League, which has only just been finished. Seeing all the captains and important characters again, and even fighting some of them is really fun, and in some of the dialogue they already kind of hint at who is going to be part of the Elite Four, which is really cool. It is also great that we don't have to manually seek all of them out, which makes things really easy and relaxing. What isn't easy or relaxing is the totem Pokémon, Ribombee. Just like Ultra Necrozma, all of its stats are doubled, making it and its allies really tough to fight. Hapu's Grand Trial now happens on Executor Island, and I don't have anything to say other than that it works much better now that it actually happens after we've taken on the trials of Pony Island. Before finally making our way up Mount Lanakila, however, we visit Lily on the bridge leading to the ruins of Conflict on Mele Mele, you know, the one that got destroyed when we helped Nebby in the beginning of the game. This is where you can catch it, now being fully evolved and free of Necrozma, which is a really cool circle in the story. I bet we were all really surprised when we entered Mount Lanakila and it didn't just look different, but there were also trainers everywhere. It seems that Game Freak was also kind of unhappy with how this pseudo-victory road turned out in Sun and Moon and changed it, so it's now a really cool little dungeon with some really strong trainers. Although I doubt that people who didn't accept that Pony Canyon was Sun and Moon's victory road will be completely happy with the changes that Mount Lanakila got. I definitely enjoyed it and was surprised again when I suddenly stumbled across Necrozma lying motionless in a crater. Although it feels a bit random and sudden, it's a great place and time to catch Necrozma, and after you do so, Colruyt will show up and hand you the items you need to fuse Necrozma with either Solgaleo or Lunala, giving him another appearance. I have to admit, after the climax I was kind of disappointed by these games. Akala and Ula Ula felt just samey, I didn't like how the story changed, and I still wasn't over the fact that we didn't get new Alola forms. But all the new content and the small little changes after the climax have completely reversed my attitude to this game. It might sound silly, but it really helped me feel as positive about these games as I do now, and it just got better the more I played into post-game, which we will get to after becoming champion of the Alola region. Before we enter the Pokémon League though, we stumble across a trainer who will only fight you if you've beaten all the other trainers in Alola, who will only battle you if you've defeated everyone else on the route they are on. At this point you can't have fought all of them, and if you've missed one, he will tell you where exactly you can find them, which is great since it felt like a lot of people didn't bother with these trainers in Sun and Moon or simply forgot about them. I can't blame them for that, since most of these trainers were placed at the beginning of the routes, so it just made sense that most people would forget about battling them. Luckily, Ultra Sun and Ultra Moon changed some of their placements, making it easier for you to remember them, which is a great change, since these trainers can actually be very hard and sometimes even show off some interesting tactical options and items. One last thing that happens before the Pokémon League is a cute little scene your character has with their fully evolved starter Pokémon if it's in your party. It's a really cool detail and kind of sad for everyone who boxed their starter. But now let's finally get to the Elite Four. They didn't change too much, some of the lineups were changed slightly and Kahili is still the only one you haven't really met, which to me is a good thing, but I get why people miss the old kind of Elite Four, where they were just mysterious characters you didn't meet before or after. One big change is present though, and his name is Molayne. He replaces Hala as a Steel-type trainer, which is kind of cool because he has a really cool and strong team, but I'm not entirely happy about Hala being gone. I always loved the fact that we fought him really early in the game and could now, hours later, see him using his full strength. Instead, we fight him in the post-game now, which is at least something. Hala's replacement also makes Olivia stand out, because she is now the only one of the Elite Four we fought before, since they cut the battle with Molayne in front of the Hokulani Observatory out. After 4 hard battles, there's only one question remaining. Who will be our real last boss this time? I really like that we got to fight Professor Kukui at the end of Sun and Moon, and I guess a lot of people still expected to fight him again in these games, which is why the little twist that at first he outright says that he's our final challenge works so well, even though I guess some people who haven't played Sun and Moon will be disappointed by the fact that he isn't in fact the champion. Instead of him, we get to fight Hao, who has been absent from the story since we got to Pony Island to get stronger, and he really made true on that promise. He defeated the Elite Four and Professor Kukui before us, so now he is the one we have to fight to become the champion of Alola. Hao makes for a great champ, and it's only the second time in the franchise that our rival, or friend in this case, is the final boss. The remixed battle music is amazing, and his team is really strong enough to defeat me the first time anyway. After defeating him and claiming our rightful throne, we finally finished the main game and now get to see the beautiful ending, which now doesn't consist of approximately 1 billion lines of dialogues and cutscenes, but rather of some short scenes showing us all the characters and what they're doing now that everything is over. I really appreciate this change, since it was kind of ridiculous how Sun and Moon handled this, but to be fair, there is a lot less to tell with Lily not leaving Alola and such. Also, it was really weird that we were kind of thrown into the battle with Tapu Koko, which thankfully no longer happens. Instead, we see some very cute credits that remind me of the credits from the old games, with nicely animated totem Pokémon dancing to the fantastic music. But of course, this doesn't mean our journey is over. Some may even say it's just beginning. So let's start with the post-game content. One of the first things you do in post-game is catch the new version exclusive Ultra Beasts in Pony Grove together with Wick and Hao. Thankfully you get to catch 2 of either Blacephalon or Stakataka, so you can easily trade for the one you can't get, which is nice, but instead of like with the other Ultra Beasts, we don't get to see the worlds these creatures come from. Seeing as to how creative and cool the Ultra Worlds are, it's kind of disappointing that we don't get to see what kind of hell Blacephalon is from. Overall, I like these 2 new Pokémon, and I found that there is more than enough post-game content for them to get their use in your team. What I was kind of disappointed about are the typings of these 2, since even though they fit really well, they could have been much more interesting and useful. Fire Fairy for Blacephalon and Ghost Rock for Stakataka would have been really cool, but I'll make do with what they are. After catching or defeating them, you get Type Null from Wick, which is disappointing. I would have much preferred if, just like Poipole, we could get and use it during the playthrough. For example, Gladion could have given it to us after our battle at Mount Lanakila. Another Pokemon I would have liked to be able to use is Zeraora, the mythical Pokemon added to Ultra Sun and Ultra Moon, and as of now the last Pokemon in the Pokédex. By now it's well known how Game Freak handles mythical Pokemon, but I think I'm not alone in wanting Game Freak to completely change the way to get them. I really liked that most of them got actual in-game events, where you had to go to a specific place with a certain item in your inventory and you had to actually battle and catch it on your own. Now we just get these mythical Pokemon handed at a ridiculously high level in post-game without any kind of story whatsoever. Maybe this would bother me less if I could actually get these Pokemon in the first place. I mean, I did get Magearna because they thankfully released a QR code that everyone could easily use, but I didn't really care for it since it's just a gift with no context given whatsoever. I will probably never own a Marshadow, and even if, it'll be in a game way in the future which has its own mythicals I will never be able to use. It's especially frustrating because lately I started to really like mythicals and hated myself for deleting my Alpha Sapphire save with Diancie, Hoopa and a whole lot of other giveaways, so I would love to be able to somehow get to use mythicals in my playthrough or at least some other way. Anyway, after sleeping for a day, the Rainbow Rocket Blood starts in a really cool way. They hijack the Festival Plaza, our favorite part of the game. Desperately we hurry to aid Sophocles in freeing this fantastic place from the blight that is Team Rainbow Rocket, but since we can't use our own Pokemon, we have to borrow some from the battle agency. It's a really cute way to incorporate this new mechanic into this added story, and it's not like the battles are hard to win, so no one should have problems with them. After dealing with Rocketeer, we unlock a new customization for the Festival Plaza, which I really like, since all the other unlockable customizations for it are kind of lame and only change the color of the castle. But of course the threat isn't over, and Giovanni and his newly formed team take over Lusumine's mansion with the help of Faber, which happens during a news interview, which is a really cool way to show this. We hurry there and meet Lily, who now not just has Pokemon herself, but also fights alongside us against the Rocket Grunts, whose battle theme is just fantastic. Guzma helps us out as well and gets some really nice scenes, while Lusumine plays the damsel in distress. To get her, we need to activate the teleporter in her room, and for that we first have to fight through 4 wings of the mansion, all ending in a fantastic battle against one of the old villains. But before we get to these awesome showdowns, we first get to solve some great and nostalgic puzzles. Teleporters are just as confusing and annoying as ever. I wanted to see everything and fight everyone, and for some reason I missed like a dozen rooms at first. I mean, it's not like there's interesting stuff hidden anywhere or interesting trainers to fight, but I wanted to see that myself. Speaking about fighting, during the Rainbow Orchid episode you fight what feels like 7 billion grunts who all have one Pokemon, which in and of itself wouldn't be so bad if every grunt actually used a different Pokemon, which isn't the case. Instead they all have one of like 6 or 7 Pokemon, which makes all these battles feel much too samey. What doesn't feel samey are the Electrode mimics lying around, which are just as much fun as they have always been. Next up is another classic puzzle that I think hasn't been used in Pokemon games before. You have to remember the sequence in which some tiles light up, and then have to step on these tiles in order. It wasn't hard at first, but then there are grunts who actively try to sabotage you solving the puzzles, which shockingly worked way too much on me, so that I actually had to write the sequence down to get through this. The 2 bosses for these wings are Maxie and Archie, who are not sporting their updated looks from Auras, but their original designs from Ruby and Sapphire, which is nice. Since they are coming from a world where their stupid plans actually worked, they use Groudon and Kyogre respectively, which is really cool since fighting someone with a legendary Pokemon is something relatively novel outside the battle tree and such, so that's really fun. It's really weird though that the other leaders use different legendaries depending on what version you play, like Lysander using Yveltal in Ultra Moon, which is the Gen 6 legendary exclusively to catch in Ultra Moon. I think it would have worked much better if they used the other legendary instead, but whatever. Back to Maxie and Archie. I kind of feared that these two characters would be version exclusive, but thankfully they're not, and they even have a cool little scene together. Also, the remix music for all these battles is amazing as well. The next puzzle uses a new mechanic with Meowth statues that you have to turn so that you can get through a room undetected. This is my favorite new addition, but it just makes it even more obvious how much the main game needed classical dungeon design like this. After this puzzle we reach Lysander from the Kalos region, who brought with him the two stupid buttons that already confused me so much in X and Y. The last puzzle brings back the spinning task, which really should have been used together with the teleporters in the Catonian gym. Anyway, after defeating Cyrus we meet Ghetsis, who is just the most crazy of the bunch and actually tries to undermine this whole Rainbow Rocket operation to make himself the most important person in the world. Luckily we beat him and Koras shows up, which is a really interesting encounter given their history. Now only one challenge is left, and what a challenge it is. Giovanni's Mega Mewtwo obliterated me, even though at that point I was incredibly over leveled since I finished the rest of the postgame before doing the Rainbow Rocket stuff. Eventually I defeated him and promptly got rewarded with 55 big nuggets, which actually isn't that much given that it doesn't cover the cost for the new expensive outfits. For some reason that's not all the reward there is though, since we also get to see Faber getting what he deserves for getting us into this mess, and for some reason we also get a sequel tease? Why? I don't think this was necessary, but we'll probably be seeing Rainbow Giovanni again, hopefully later rather than sooner. I want the next games to start a new generation, which should do its own thing and have its own ideas, rather than it just revolving around another one of Giovanni's ploys. All in all, I have to say that I really like the Rainbow Rocket episode. It is adequately long, even though there are a few too many filler fights, has some great boss battles, puzzles and music, and offers fan service for every generation, which is very much appreciated, even if of course the focus is on the first generation as always. As I was expecting, the Rainbow Rocket episode completely replaces the Ultra Beast story with Luca and Annabelle. I really liked that story and would have loved to see it being expanded or at least changed to fit the new Ultra worlds, but nothing of the story remains. Thankfully we now at least have a much improved way of actually catching the Ultra Beasts, instead of them suddenly appearing in Alola, which is appreciated just as the minigame we have to play to get there. I really like this Ultra Wormhole Ride thingy, whatever it's called, although the way they introduce it after the battle against Duskmane or Dawn Wings Necrozma is definitely weird. Instead of it just handing you the reins and making it very easy to get to the Ultra Megalopolis, the game floods you with tutorials and leaves all the other Ultra Wormholes open, so that you might have some trouble reaching Ultra Megalopolis if you're not too good at this minigame, which might probably be the case because A, this is the first time you play it, and B, the game defaults to gyro controls, making it even more awkward to control Lunala or Solgaleo than it already is. Of course there's a way to turn it off, but why do they hide it on a completely different island, inside a building most people won't even think about looking, instead of just asking you during the tutorials which one of the two modes you would prefer? Anyway, once you change the controls and get used to the mechanics, this minigame is actually very fun in my opinion, and I actually really like the solution to the problem of where do we put all the legendaries and Ultra Beasts. The legendaries from old games are appreciated, but I don't understand why they split them up the way they did. If you want to catch a Rayquaza for example, you need to have both Groudon and Kyogre in your party, both of which are, of course, version exclusive. Even Suicune requires you to have both Entei and Raikou in your party, but at least they dialed down from Auras a bit. All the legendaries having their unique battle themes is really great, and being able to select these songs in online battles is great too, but since there still is no national dex in Ultra Sun and Ultra Moon, you don't get dex entries when catching these legendaries, which actually makes me feel like there's something missing from the experience. Pre-release, people were speculating, or rather hoping, that we might be visiting the dungeons and places where the legendaries were caught in their respective games, but this of course didn't turn out to be true, which is understandable given that we can catch more than 30 legendaries. So we meet all of them in one of 4 random locations, which are all outside of Alola, which means you can evolve your Pikachu, Execute and Cubone to their non-Alolan evolutions, which is a really elegant solution to a problem that should not have existed in the first place. Outside of the legendaries, you can also encounter some other random Pokémon in these nondescript worlds, which is cool since now, with the sole exception of Numel and Deontay, you can catch every Pokémon able to Mega Evolve. What's interesting about these encounters is the fact that you can easily get shiny Pokémon from them. I haven't been hunting for them, but for some reason I have like 5 shinies already, and I'm not sure if I should be happy or sad about the limited variety of Pokémon available through this method. While you can call all of these things cheap if you're cynical, you can't say the same about the worlds of the Ultra Beasts, and since I really like all of them, I'll talk about them individually. We already know Nihilega's world, and it hasn't changed from Sun and Moon, so there's really nothing to say here. I can't say the same thing about Buzzwold's Ultra World, although not much is going on here. I love the music, how big this area looks, and the fact that everything looks like muscles, but other than that there is nothing too interesting going on here. Pheromosa's world is a little more interesting to explore, since you have to use your Pokerite Pokémon, which is nice, although I wonder how you can summon them, since you're obviously not even near the Alola region anymore. It's beautiful as heck though, and really fits this Ultra Beast, which is something I could say about every one of their worlds. Xurkitree's world is absolutely hilarious, mostly because you can see their silly running animation. How can anyone not love this Pokémon? Also, can you imagine being trapped in this world? I kinda wanna see an anime episode about that. Celesteela's world is really interesting looking, and is probably the one that makes me really sad we can't explore more of these worlds. It's really disappointing therefore that this is one of the least interesting worlds to play through. The complete opposite is true for Katana's Ultra Forest, which makes me kind of sad that this is a version exclusive, especially because Pheromosa's and Celesteela's worlds aren't nearly this interesting. Instead of just walking up to the Ultra Beast like everywhere else, you actually fight some inhabitants of this weird world who use Katana in battle, which is such a cool idea and perpetuates the idea that these beasts are just regular Pokémon in their respective worlds. Last but not least we have Guzzlord's Ultra Ruin, which is the strongest of the bunch. First you have a unique character to talk to, then you have a really cool area to traverse that's reminiscent of Holy City, and lastly you can catch Guzzlord, which is just adorable and amazing. I love everything about this Ultra world, and I really love all of them, but as always I would love it even more if there was just a little bit more to all of them. My favorite part of Sun and Moon has always been Eastern Pony, specifically Pony Plains. I don't want the Switch games to be fully open world games like Breath of the Wild, but more open areas that you can explore freely by yourself should work really well, without changing the formula too much. And to me, Pony Plains is a perfect example of how you can do this. It even has different types of random encounters with tall grass of course, flying Pokémon, shaking grass, as well as trees and bushes with Pokémon in them. It makes traversing it much more interesting. The rest of Eastern Pony Island hasn't changed too much. The only real notable change is Zygarde now being in Resolution Cave, like it should have been from the beginning. Don't get me wrong, I enjoyed that collection quest in Sun and Moon since it helped make Zygarde a presence in this game, but the totem stickers are much better and Resolution Cave was always the perfect spot for it to be. Of course it's the 50% form you catch there. The 10% form, as well as an easy way to get the complete form, is done really well, with Dexio and Cena giving it to you in the facility on Route 16. The rest of the post-game consists of random smaller things, so let's quickly talk about all of them. I like the fact that you can still fight the 3 trial captains Ilima, Lana and, depending on your version, either Kiawe or Mallow. And I always thought people missed these little quests in Sun and Moon, since it would require you to return to an island you have just completed, so it makes sense that you can now do these things in post-game. However, since this is where you get 3 out of the 8 alternative battle styles for your trainers, this means that these are now locked to post-game, which is really sad. Another thing that is kind of sad is the fact that everything in post-game is balanced so that it could be the first thing you do after becoming champion. That means that every fight is done with Pokémon who are around level 50, and since there are quite a few things to do in post-game, this means you will end up being over-leveled for some things if you want to do everything. But I can't see how they could have avoided this. What they definitely could have avoided is having Porygon, King's Rock, as well as the Deep Sea stuff only be available in post-game. Is it not bad enough that you have to evolve these Pokémon with special items? Now these are also relegated to post-game? I mean sure, there are rare SOS chances for the Pokémon like Politoed, but that's not really an excuse. It's also kind of sad that Potown doesn't really change after Team Skullers disbanded. It would have been so cool to go back there and see people actually working to restore this city to its former state, let alone seeing the city like that again. But since that definitely would have been quite a bit of work, I can understand why they didn't choose to do this. Giving the Pokémon League another tier of rematches wouldn't have taken that much work though, or at least giving all the champion challengers teams of 6. Although Chansey and Blissey farming is a needed addition to make leveling much easier, this could have been another help, and I kinda yearn for more enemies that use Mega Evolution as well. And last but not least, the battle tree has gotten an interesting change. You can take any Pokemon you want into the easiest modes, and they won't be scaled down if they're over level 50, which, although it would have been a great option to turn off, makes these modes a breeze. The fact that you can take any Pokemon into these battles is fantastic though, since it finally gives you a non-online way to use the legendary and mythical Pokemon you might have, which is appreciated, although it's weird that it took them so long to do it. So, what do I finally think about these games, having analyzed them way too deeply? It kinda feels like I have been incredibly negative in this video, but I'm quite sure I really love this game and I can't wait to play through them again. Sure, more exclusive Z moves to Pokemon like Lurantis or Toucanon would have been great, there still isn't a national dex, and looking at the potential these games had, there is quite a lot that I would have loved to see in them, but for what they are really good. Sun and Moon didn't need a third version like Ultra Sun and Ultra Moon. Diamond and Pearl needed Platinum, and X and Y would have been redeemed by Pokemon Z, but Sun and Moon were already so good, though obviously not flawless, that most people would have rather seen a sequel than what we've got. There's no way to change what we got, and it's easy to talk about things you would have done differently, but considering the short development time and the differences between 3D and 2D games, I think Ultra Sun and Ultra Moon do quite a good job with what they are. We shouldn't forget the smaller additions like completely new version differing Pokédex entries or the harder difficulty over the potential these games had, and we shouldn't quickly judge them as lazy cash grabs that could have easily been $10 DLC. Sure, a $10 DLC would probably have worked really well and would have added some great content, maybe being centered around Rainbow Rocket and their ploy, but then we wouldn't have gotten the reworked trials, the Ultra Worlds, the new Pokemon and forms, Mantine Surf, and all the other little changes. If you remember the beginning of this video, I said that Ultra Sun and Ultra Moon are more than the sum of their parts. This is what I meant with that. Aside from continuing the strengths and ambitions of Sun and Moon, like the focus on characters and characterization, the focus on nature and the Alola region, as well as the focus on difficult encounters, the game definitely fixes most of the objective faults Sun and Moon had. Those were A. The beginning of the game, which has definitely been shortened and smoothed over, but could have been shortened even more. B. The trials. All except the normal and dragon type trials have had either additions or complete overhauls, making them much more enjoyable and interesting, and also making it less obvious of how rushed they were. C. The empty lots, all of them having been filled by interesting stuff that of course never came even close to the wildest expectations and ideas of fans. D. The last act of the game, which basically was non-existent since after defeating Lusamine and catching Nebby, you only had the Pokémon League left. But now it is a genuinely cool part of the journey. And lastly, E, the post-game, which even though the great Looker and Animal story no longer exists, has genuinely been strengthened by a few cool new additions and a genuinely fantastic Rainbow Rocket episode. So all these things are definitely fixed, or at least better than in Sun and Moon, even though the subjective problems of these games either persist or got even worse. Especially since some solutions to them, like a way to skip cutscenes, would have been so easy to do. What also got worse, at least in my opinion, is the climax of the game. It's by no means bad, but it's the one area of the game where I would have preferred them to add new stuff to, rather than to change it completely. This is also the biggest and pretty much only reason why I can't call Ultra Sun and Ultra Moon the definitive Alola experiences. With the exception of Pokemon Yellow, I would recommend every third version over the original releases, especially with Platinum. But since Sun and Moon aren't really worse than the Ultra versions, and since they, thanks to the changes to the story, have a reason to exist besides them, my honest recommendation would be to play both games, Sun or Moon, and Ultra Sun or Ultra Moon, which is kind of disappointing, since I feel the Ultra versions would have worked much better if they blew Sun and Moon out of the water in every regard. That said, I simply can't wait to play these games again, and I can definitely see them staying my favorite games for quite some time, at least until the games for the Switch will be released, whose massive potential will probably still go as unused as the one for Ultra Sun and Ultra Moon, thanks to rushing the development because of time constraints. Or not, we will see. Thanks for watching.